this is a great subject for a daily drawing exercise. And let me say from the start, I really enjoyed it, even more than many others. A bit of a novel experience for me because my 0.2mm Copic multi-liner pen that I'm using is one that I dropped yesterday, and I unfortunately dropped it on the end, and I thought, well, that's wrecked it, and to my surprise it hadn't. But as I began to draw from it this morning, I really did discover that it has been impacted by the fall, and I have to hold it in a certain rotation to really get a line out of it. As it rotates around in any other direction, the line becomes lighter until finally it won't really draw from one angle. But that actually meant I had a lot of ability to create a light or ragged line, and albeit perhaps a slightly blotchy one at best. But that seemed to particularly suit this subject, this rustic French cottage. Well, rustic's in inverted commas because it was a cottage built by and for Marie Antoinette. So it's part of the royal dairy farm that she had constructed for her amusement in the palace grounds of Versailles. So I'm really going off the angles and then positioning and aligning. And I'm working at keeping my lines very light and loose and trying to avoid straight lines that are going to appear as strong straight lines at the end, because this is a cottage. The roof is thatch, which gives a very jagged and non-smooth surface, and the walls are not dressed stone or brick. They have a slightly uneven look to them, surface, which includes the corners. And all the timber is deliberately non-dressed as well. So we don't want to create a lot of hard edges if we want to capture the cottage effect. It's not just accuracy of form, but it's getting the feel of our subject, getting the sharpness, the smoothness, the reflectiveness, or in this case, the slightly unevenness of almost everything in the scene. So I'm very happy to use this pen without replacing the nib. And you'll notice that when I'm doing the shadows behind the windows, I'm allowing for the fact that the shadow being cast across the front of the windows is going to make some parts of some panes of glass darker than others. So that's this sort of detail we need to be intentional about before we put the first line on the paper. Now, this drawing took me, I think it was 20 or 21 minutes to draw. A lot of that was actually spent on the hedge in the front. So just to put enough line work there to create the effect of a hedge with a 0.2mm pen did take a little bit of time. So although I'm really wanting these drawings to be faster, I don't mind spending a bit of extra time for something such as that, because I think it's actually a good demonstration of creating the effect of something such as this hedge in a fast, still relatively fast gestural fashion. I also wanted to create a bit of value, a bit of darkness in the front of the hedge to accentuate the brightness of the light on the cottage. So even though it's not a particularly dark hedge, in comparison to the whitey beige of that cottage wall, particularly the one facing us that's got the sunlight full on it, it's quite a strong contrast. Now, I'm actually running out of paper on the right hand side here. It's not so obvious unless you look carefully on the video, but my paper doesn't extend as far as the camera does. And so I did just narrow that room I've just drawn, that side room, a little bit, so that there was room for some gap between the end of the cottage and the end of the paper. Normally I say just run off the page, don't distort the proportions, but in this case it wasn't going to affect the proportions of the cottage. It wasn't going to make it look odd or awkward, so I thought I would just do it so it fit the bit of paper more neatly. And now we have the rails. I have drawn this cottage once before from a front-on position that, again, I unexpectedly particularly enjoyed drawing it. Maybe I should draw some of the other buildings on Maria Antoinette's dairy farm that I've got. Now, notice the particularly light touch I draw this tree with. It's, in terms of the depth of planes of this scene, it's quite a long way in the distance. And because the actual closest objects and the main object is drawn with a relatively light and thin touch, I had to therefore make that tree even lighter and more sparse and with a thinner touch, because I still want the cottage to stand out as clearly being closer. And now I'm just doing some adjustments to strengthen some of the lines I've done in various ways to have the cottage actually stand out more from the background. Now that I've drawn some of the background, you'll notice that I strengthened the corners, but I did them not with just a quick straight line, which I might have done if it were a palace of dressed stone, but I've used a broken line to create the slightly uneven edge that the cottage has. And now I start the hedge and the fair bit of time that I spent on it. And really it's still a very loose and very gestural style. I don't want this to be tight, detailed work, or it will draw the eye more than I want it to. I still want the focus of this drawing to be the cottage, even though it's not the closest thing. We're looking over the hedge. It's part of the framing of trees and other farming natural elements. I realise that I do a bit of hatching on that door for the local colour. So we can use hatching, we can apply value for two reasons. One is for shade and shadow, and the second one is to reflect the colour, the variation of colour that we see. And of course, we can do it to reflect shade and shadow on colour as well. So I'm actually exaggerating in this hedge the shadowed glimpses we can see within it, because I want to make it a little clearer than I think it's going to be that this is a hedge. I don't want people to think it's a wall. And so I add a few bits where we can see sunlight on the stems, the branches within the leaves. So again, I'm just adjusting some of the elements of this, because as we progress towards the end, we can start to see parts, especially parts we did earlier, in a new way, or we just realize that some parts are looking too strong or not strong enough. These are the skills we only learn if we finish our drawings, where we make these adjustments of looking at the overall balance of what we've done for line, for tone, for attention, for accuracy, and where we then actually adjust them. And again, I'm adjusting some of my values for the shadows here. I realized, yep, I hadn't done the door, and so I put it in. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Well, what do you think of this French cottage? Cottage, I suspect, in inverted commas. Look, it's a beautiful subject to draw. It's a lovely subject to challenge us with perhaps a lighter touch and not to go so heavily with our lines. Of course, you'll find this photo reference on my channel community page, if you'd like to have a go drawing it. And I do recommend it, and especially perhaps to create a lighter feel for a beautiful sunlit day for this wonderful rustic subject. So why not give it a go? But look, as always, whatever you draw and however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.